If someone had told me a year ago that I'd go from sleeping in my car to owning a $47 million estate in New York City, I would have thought they were mocking me. But life has a strange way of breaking you, right before it hands you the keys to something you never dreamed possible. My name is Ruth Michael, and I'm 61 years old. There was a time not long ago when I had everything: a husband I trusted, 2 children I adored, and a home that held 32 years of memories. I gave my heart, my youth, and every ounce of loyalty I had to a man who promised me forever. Until the day he traded our vows for someone younger, and left me with nothing but an old car, a small check, and a name he no longer wanted to share. For months, I lived like a ghost in the city where everyone used to know me. Friends stopped calling. My own children stopped visiting. I became invisible. The woman who once hosted dinner parties was now standing behind grocery stores, waiting for the trash bins to open. That night, cold, wet, and hopeless, I was digging through a dumpster behind a Whole Foods. I remember my hands trembling as I tried to pull out a box of expired bread. The rain soaked through my coat, and every drop felt like the world reminding me I was alone. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a car stop behind me. The engine purred softly, too smooth, too expensive for that part of town. A man stepped out, holding an umbrella. His shoes didn't belong near garbage. He looked straight at me and said, "Excuse me, are you Ruth Michael?" My first instinct was fear. I thought maybe he was security, ready to chase me off like everyone else. But he didn't shout. He didn't sneer. He just waited. When I nodded, he smiled, the kind of gentle smile you don't expect when you look like I did that night. He said 8 words that changed every single thing about my life. "Your great uncle in New York just died." And then, with calm certainty, "He left you $47 million. The world froze. The rain, the sound of traffic, even my heartbeat, everything stopped. It felt like a cruel joke, the kind the universe plays right before it crushes you again. But it wasn't a joke. That man in the suit was real. His name was Thomas, and his message would turn my life, and my pain, into something extraordinary. Before I tell you how I went from homeless to heir, from rejected to unstoppable, I need you to know why that night meant everything. Because this isn't just about money. It's about dignity, betrayal, and second chances. Have you ever given someone your whole life, only for them to throw it away like you never mattered? Has anyone ever made you feel like you weren't worth saving? If you've ever been there, you'll understand what I felt. Before we go any further, do me a small favor, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love hearing your stories, and trust me, you don't want to miss how this one unfolds. Because that night, standing in the rain with a stranger who knew my name, I didn't realize I was standing at the edge of my rebirth. Before everything fell apart, my life looked stable, peaceful. People used to say Vincent and I were the kind of couple others admired. We lived in a beautiful craftsman home in Portland, Oregon, the kind of place where the front porch stayed covered in flowers all year round. Vincent owned a successful architecture firm. I'd left my nursing career when our first child, Nathan, was born, and for more than 3 decades, my world revolved around our family. Every Sunday morning, Vincent would pour me coffee and say, "You're the heart of this home, Ruth. I build structures, you build our life." And I believed him. Every single word. It's strange how betrayal never walks in shouting, it tiptoes, quiet and polite, until one day it's sitting at your dinner table. It began on a Tuesday in March. I'd made Vincent's favorite meal, pot roast with vegetables. He'd promised he'd be home by 6. At 8:47, I was still watching the clock when he finally walked in, smelling of rain and cologne that wasn't his. He loosened his tie, kissed my cheek half-heartedly, and muttered, "Sorry, big project. Can't check my phone every 5 minutes." I laughed it off, tried to. I told myself he was just tired. That marriage meant patience, forgiveness, understanding. But that night, he ate without tasting a thing I cooked. The late nights started piling up. So did the excuses. New clients, meetings, team dinners. His clothes began to carry faint traces of perfume, something floral, expensive, definitely not mine. I'd ask, "Rough day at the office?" He'd reply with a tired sigh and turn away before my eyes could find the truth. Still, I clung to hope. That's what women like me do, we hold broken things and call it love. April came, and I noticed the bank statements. Small withdrawals at first, 500 here, 800 there. Then, one morning, a charge for $2,300 from a jewelry store I'd never heard of. When I asked, his expression turned sharp. "Are you tracking my spending now?" he snapped. "I'm the one earning it, Ruth. I shouldn't need permission to buy something." That moment, the way he said earning, sliced deeper than I expected. 32 years of motherhood, cooking, cleaning, raising our kids, supporting his every dream, and suddenly I wasn't earning anything. I was a burden. A cost. I tried calling our daughter, Claire. She was in Seattle then, too busy for long talks. Her text came hours later, "Busy with work. Talk later." Nathan wasn't much better. When I asked if he could visit, he said, "Mom, I'm 29. I can't just drop everything." That's when I realized how far I'd already faded from their lives. By May, the distance between Vincent and me had become its own room in our house. He'd come home late, shower immediately, then fall asleep facing away from me. No more goodnight kisses. No laughter in the mornings. Just silence, thick and suffocating. One morning, as I brewed coffee, he looked at me and said, "You should think about joining a gym. Maybe update your wardrobe too." I laughed nervously. "Vincent, I am someone's grandmother." He didn't even smile. He just grabbed his keys and left. That was the day I stood in the kitchen, our kitchen, where I'd spent half my life cooking, celebrating, cleaning, and realized he didn't see me anymore. Not as a wife. Not as a woman. Not as anything. I started watching him more carefully after that. His phone, always face down. The sudden text notifications at midnight. The way he'd leave the room to answer calls. Each sign was a whisper, telling me what I already knew but wasn't ready to face. By June, I was living beside a stranger wearing my husband's face. Our 32nd anniversary was approaching, and I told myself maybe a special dinner would bring us back. I booked a table at the same restaurant where he'd proposed, Higgins. I even bought a new blue dress, hoping he'd look at me the way he used to. When he came home that evening, he wasn't dressed for dinner. He was carrying a manila envelope. He placed it on the table and said, "We need to talk." I tried to smile. "Let's talk at the restaurant." He cut me off. "We're not going anywhere, Ruth. I want a divorce." Just like that. No shouting. No warning. Just a calm voice ending 32 years of marriage. My knees went weak. I asked, "Is there someone else?" His silence told me the truth before his words did. Her name was Amber. 27. One of his employees. That night, I learned that the man who once promised me forever had been preparing to erase me for months. And as I sat there, crying at the same table where we'd once planned our future, he handed me papers that made sure I'd have no future at all. That was the start of my collapse. But it was also the first step towards something neither of us could have imagined. After that night, the world I'd built collapsed piece by piece, quietly, efficiently, like he'd rehearsed it. Vincent didn't just want a divorce. He wanted to erase me. Within a week, I was sitting across from his lawyer, a sharp man with cold eyes who spoke like I was an inconvenience. He had a folder full of numbers and a smile that didn't reach his face. He called my 32 years of sacrifice non-financial contributions. He said my nursing degree was outdated. He said the house, the business, and nearly everything in our life had been purchased through Vincent's earnings. I remember gripping the edge of my chair so tightly my knuckles turned white. My own lawyer, Patricia, kind, exhausted, and underpaid, whispered, "Ruth, try to stay calm. Oregon law won't side with you on emotional grounds. Emotional grounds. That's what they called the 32 years I'd spent keeping our family alive. When the settlement came, it wasn't a negotiation, it was an execution. I walked away with $30,000, my 2003 Honda, and a few boxes of clothes. Vincent kept the business, the house, the investments, everything. The court called it fair. He didn't even look at me during the hearing. Just signed his name and stood up like he'd been waiting his whole life to be free. What hurt more than the money was the silence that followed. Nathan called once during the process. His voice was distant, annoyed, impatient. "Mom, you need to stop dragging this out. Dad deserves to be happy." I could barely speak. "He's leaving me with nothing." He sighed. "You got a settlement. Maybe it's time you started your own life instead of depending on him." I hung up before he could say more. Claire, my daughter, was even harsher. When I asked if I could stay with her for a few weeks while I figured things out, she said, "Mom, you cry too much. I can't have that energy around Sophia. My granddaughter. The one I used to rock to sleep. Now I was bad for her. Too broken. Too heavy. Too inconvenient." By October, I was living in a cheap motel on 82nd Avenue, the kind with flickering lights and carpets that never dried. The manager, Linda, felt sorry for me. She gave me an extra day when I couldn't pay. But pity has an expiration date, just like everything else. When my money ran out, I packed what was left of my life into the back seat of my car. I parked behind a grocery store that night, wrapped myself in a blanket, and watched rain slide down the windshield. I used to fall asleep to the sound of Vincent's breathing beside me. Now I fell asleep to the hum of delivery trucks. Days blurred together. I showered at gyms when I could afford it. I ate donated bread from food banks. People stopped looking at me when they passed. That was the hardest part, being invisible. I'd look at my reflection in shop windows and barely recognize the woman staring back. The one who used to smile. The one who used to bake, decorate, laugh, live. That woman was gone. The first time I checked a dumpster, I cried. Not because I was disgusted, because I was hungry. It was behind a Trader Joe's. Someone had thrown out sealed bags of apples and bread. I waited until night, when the parking lot was empty. My hands were shaking as I opened the lid. The smell hit me, damp cardboard, spoiled fruit, and something sour, but I didn't care. I grabbed what I could and ran back to my car before anyone could see me. That became my routine. Mornings at food banks, nights behind stores. I learned which dumpsters held food still good enough to eat. I learned how to avoid cameras. I learned how to disappear. It's strange. When you lose everything, even shame starts to fade. Hunger replaces it. Survival replaces it. I used to be someone's wife. Now I was just another face the world didn't see. 3 months after the divorce, I saw Vincent again, from a distance. He was coming out of a restaurant downtown, holding hands with her, Amber. She was wearing a red coat, laughing at something he said. He looked happy. Free. Younger. He saw me. For a second, his smile faltered. I stood across the street, soaked from rain, holding a torn grocery bag. He turned away. That moment broke something inside me completely. Later that night, I sat in my car and replayed his last words to me. "No one will ever love a broke woman like you." He said it with a smirk, like it was a fact, not an insult. And maybe part of me believed him. Because when you've been discarded long enough, you start to think maybe you were trash all along. That was my lowest point. Not the hunger. Not the cold. It was realizing that the people I'd loved most in the world had convinced me I wasn't worth saving. But I didn't know something was already shifting. Somewhere far away, a man I'd never met was signing a document that would change everything. He'd written my name into his will. And in less than a month, a stranger in a suit would find me, and hand me back the life Vincent swore I'd never have again. If you've ever been left with nothing, if someone ever made you feel like your story was over, stay with me. Because what happened next proved that no one decides your ending but you. People think hitting rock bottom happens all at once. It doesn't. It's a slow fall, a little lower each day until you stop noticing the ground disappearing beneath you. By November, I'd been living in my car for nearly 6 weeks. I knew every parking lot where I wouldn't get ticketed, every gas station that allowed restroom use without a purchase, and every spot where I could catch a few hours of sleep without being noticed. My car became my home, a cramped world of blankets, a pillow from the motel, and plastic bags filled with clothes I couldn't throw away. I kept a photograph of my children on the dashboard. Some nights, I'd stare at their faces and whisper their names until my voice gave out. The nights were the hardest. The sound of rain tapping on the roof, the rumble of distant traffic, the occasional knock from a security guard telling me to move along. Every time I started the engine to warm up, I'd watch the fuel gauge drop and wonder what I'd do when it hit empty. Hunger changes a person. At first, I told myself I'd never take food from dumpsters again, that I had too much pride. But pride doesn't feed you. Hunger doesn't care about dignity. So I learned which stores threw away bread on Mondays, which ones tossed fruit before closing. I wasn't alone, there were others like me, people who had once lived normal lives but had quietly vanished from society's notice. We didn't talk much. We just nodded when we crossed paths. One morning, I woke up with my hands shaking. I hadn't eaten properly in 3 days. I drove to a public park and sat there for hours, trying to gather the strength to walk to a food bank. But even that felt impossible. I remember staring at my reflection in the side mirror, hollow eyes, gray roots showing through, cheeks sunken from weight loss. I looked like a stranger. That reflection broke me more than any court ruling ever did. Later that week, I went to the library just to stay warm. I used to love reading, now I just sat in a corner pretending to, so no one would ask questions. I could feel people's eyes on me, the way they do when they recognize someone who doesn't belong anymore. When you're poor, people can smell it. It clings to you like a label. One evening, I gathered what little change I had left and bought a cup of coffee at a diner. The waitress was kind, she gave me an extra biscuit by accident. I think she knew. I sat there for hours, pretending to read a menu so I could stay inside a little longer. When I finally left, the cold hit me like punishment. That night was Halloween. The city was alive, children in costumes, couples laughing, the smell of caramel corn drifting from somewhere nearby. It should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like watching the world from behind glass. I parked behind a Whole Foods, one of the cleaner alleys. Rain started to fall, steady and hard. I pulled my hood up, climbed out, and walked to the dumpsters. The cold metal burned my fingers. Inside was a box of protein bars, some packaged chicken, a few bruised apples. I stuffed what I could into my backpack, careful not to rip the bag. My hands were trembling from exhaustion. That's when I heard it, the sound of tires on wet pavement. A car pulling up behind me. Not the kind of car you expect to hear in that neighborhood, smooth, expensive, quiet. I froze. I thought it was security. My heart started pounding so hard I could barely breathe. A man's voice cut through the rain. Calm. Steady. Excuse me, are you Ruth Michael? I turned around slowly, still clutching the protein bars like proof of my failure. He stood there in a dark suit, holding an umbrella. His shoes were spotless. His eyes were kind, not pitying, just human. My voice barely worked. Who are you? My name is Thomas Whitmore. I'm an attorney from New York. I've been looking for you. I laughed, a short, broken sound. You've got the wrong person. He shook his head. No, Mrs. Michael. Your great-uncle, Bernard Hayes, passed away last month. He left you his estate. The rain kept falling. My ears rang. I thought it was a scam, a cruel trick. Estate? I managed to whisper. You mean, money? Thomas nodded gently. Approximately $47 million. My knees gave out. I might have fallen if he hadn't reached out and caught me. It didn't make sense. I hadn't eaten a full meal in days. I was drenched, filthy, shaking. And this stranger was telling me I was worth $47 million. He handed me a card. His voice never changed, calm, professional. There's a hotel 3 blocks away. I've already booked you a room. Everything's covered. A car will take you to the airport in the morning. I didn't move. I couldn't. Thomas placed the hotel key card in my hand, closed my fingers around it, and said, "You deserve better than this, Mrs. Michael. Go rest." Then he walked back to his car and disappeared into the rain. For a long time, I just stood there. The rain had stopped feeling cold. My clothes were heavy, my heart heavier. I looked down at the key in my hand, a small piece of plastic, glowing under the streetlight. That night, I slept in a real bed for the first time in months. And as I lay there staring at the ceiling, I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or pray. Because I couldn't tell if I'd just been rescued. Or if this was the cruelest dream of all. I didn't sleep that night. The hotel bed was soft, the sheets smelled clean, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. Every time I closed my eyes, I expected the front desk to knock and tell me there'd been a mistake, that I didn't belong there. When morning came, I half expected the key card to stop working. But it didn't. Breakfast arrived at my door, real food, eggs, fruit, coffee that tasted like heaven. I ate slowly, afraid it might be the last proper meal I'd ever have. By 9:30, Thomas was waiting in the lobby. Same suit, same calm eyes. He handed me an envelope, a plane ticket, first class. "Your uncle's estate is expecting you in New York," he said. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear him. I followed him outside, and when he opened the car door for me, I hesitated. "Why me?" I whispered. He smiled slightly. "That's a question only the will can answer." The flight felt unreal. I sat by the window, staring at clouds, sipping orange juice that tasted like luxury. 48 hours earlier, I'd been digging through garbage. Now a flight attendant was offering me a warm towel. When we landed at JFK, a driver met us holding a sign with my name, Mrs. Ruth Michael. Seeing my name printed like that nearly made me cry. It had been so long since anyone said it with respect. As we drove through Manhattan, I pressed my hand against the window, watching the skyline flash by. I felt small, like a visitor in someone else's dream. Thomas broke the silence. "Your great-uncle Bernard Hayes was a venture capitalist. He never married, no children. But before he passed, he changed his will, very deliberately." I swallowed hard. "I never met him." "He knew of you," Thomas said. "Followed your life quietly. He made sure you'd be found, no matter where you were." The words didn't make sense. I'd barely been surviving, and somehow a man I'd never met had been looking for me. When the car stopped, I looked up, and my breath caught. A glass building so tall it seemed to scrape the clouds. Thomas led me inside, past a marble lobby where people moved like they had purpose. I didn't. I just followed, clutching my worn purse. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse. No hallway, no neighbors, just a space so wide and bright it felt unreal. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park. Sunlight poured across white marble floors. "This was Bernard's home," Thomas said quietly. "Now, it's yours." I walked in slowly, afraid to touch anything. The living room was larger than my entire house in Portland. A grand piano stood near the windows, untouched. On the wall hung portraits, Bernard as a young man, standing beside famous faces I recognized from history books. I whispered, "He left this, to me?" Thomas nodded. "And much more." At the dining table sat 2 people, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a younger man in a gray suit. Thomas introduced them. This is Patricia Chen, Mr. Hayes' estate manager, and David Rothstein, the senior partner at our firm. They invited me to sit. My hands trembled as David opened a folder filled with documents. Mrs. Michael, he began, Mr. Hayes left you his estate, the penthouse, a yacht docked in the Hamptons, and approximately $30 million in liquid assets. I froze. The room seemed to tilt. 30 million? I whispered. David continued calmly. There's more. $17 million have been placed in a trust, with specific instructions. The total value is approximately $47 million. I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. Patricia reached across the table, placing her hand gently on mine. Your uncle wanted you to have a second chance. He knew what had happened, your divorce, your loss. He said no woman who gave her life to others should be left to starve. Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. He knew about that? Thomas nodded. He'd read every public record, every court filing. He even knew about your children. He was furious when he learned how your husband treated you. That's why he rewrote his will. David turned a page and slid a document toward me. This outlines the one condition attached to your inheritance. The paper trembled in my hands as I read. To Ruth Michael, I leave $17 million in trust, to create a foundation for women over 50 who have been financially devastated by divorce. Ruth will serve as director and may draw a reasonable salary. Additionally, I leave her $1 million with this instruction: use it to ensure that her former husband understands the value of what he threw away. My eyes blurred. I had to blink several times before I could speak. He wants me to use money, for revenge? Patricia smiled faintly. He wanted you to have the choice. What you do with it, that's entirely up to you. I sat there, silent, as the weight of it sank in. A week ago, I couldn't afford a meal. Now I was being asked to decide how to spend millions, and whether to forgive or teach a lesson. David continued, your ex-husband's business is collapsing, by the way. He made poor investments. The woman he left you for has already walked away. I looked up sharply. You know that? He nodded. Mr. Hayes kept tabs on everything until the end. I didn't know whether to feel relief, anger, or pity. Maybe all three. Patricia leaned forward. Take time, Ruth. The penthouse is fully stocked. Clothes, food, even art supplies if you wish. Bernard wanted you to live, not just survive. They left soon after, giving me space. I walked through each room like a stranger exploring a museum of my own life: luxury closets, a library, a terrace with a garden overlooking the park. Every step echoed with disbelief. When I reached the window, the sun was setting. Gold light poured over the city, and I saw my reflection, cleaner, calmer, still in shock but alive. That was the moment I decided something quietly powerful. I wouldn't waste this gift. I wouldn't spend it hiding or hoarding. If life had given me a second chance, I'd make sure every woman who'd ever been silenced, broken, or abandoned had one too. And maybe, just maybe, I'd show Vincent Michael what it feels like to lose everything to someone who refuses to stay broken. I spent the first week in New York barely speaking. My days were filled with lawyers, bankers, and a quiet kind of disbelief. Every signature I placed on a document pulled me further away from the woman who had slept in a car. The first night I stood on the terrace overlooking Central Park, the city glittering below me, I whispered a promise to myself, that I would never let anyone make me feel small again. Patricia, the estate manager, helped me set up the foundation my uncle had envisioned. We named it Second Chapter Women's Alliance. Its purpose was simple: to help women over 50 rebuild their lives after being left behind. But even as I built something new, one thought kept circling my mind: Vincent. The man who had taken 32 years of my life and walked away without looking back. The man who'd told me no one would ever love a broke woman. Thomas had mentioned that Bernard's investigators had gathered information on him. One evening, curiosity, or maybe something stronger, made me open the file. Inside were pages of bank records, property documents, and confidential memos. Vincent's company was drowning in debt. He'd made risky investments in a development project that had already collapsed. The woman he'd left me for had drained what was left of his savings and disappeared. For a long moment, I just stared at those pages, not smiling, not angry, just still. Life has a way of balancing its own books. 2 days later, I called Thomas. "I need your help with something personal," I said. He didn't ask why. He just replied, "When?" By the next morning, my new Portland attorney had wired funds to purchase controlling interest in Michael and Associates, Vincent's company. A quiet buyout through a shell corporation. He never saw it coming. Patricia arranged my return to Portland within the week. When I stepped off the plane, I was no longer the woman he'd thrown away. I wore confidence the way I used to wear shame, everywhere. The next morning, I made a call I never imagined making. Vincent answered on the third ring. His voice was sharp, irritated. "Ruth? How did you get this number?" "Relax," I said calmly. "I'm not calling for an argument. I'm calling to make you an offer." Silence. Then suspicion. "What kind of offer?" "One that might save your business." I told him to meet me the next afternoon at the coffee shop inside Powell's Books, the same one where I'd spent years wandering through novels about courage while living a life without any. When I arrived, he was already there. He looked thinner, older. His expensive suit didn't hide the exhaustion in his face. For a moment, he didn't recognize me. Then his eyes widened. "Ruth," he said quietly. "You look different." I smiled. Turns out losing everything can be quite the makeover. He tried to speak, but I placed a folder on the table before he could. "This is a proposal," I said. "A $2 million investment into Michael and Associates. Enough to clear your debts and fund your Beaverton project." He blinked. $2 million? Where would you get that kind of money? Let's just say I met a generous relative. Vincent leaned forward, trying to regain control. "What's the catch?" I met his eyes. 60% ownership. I become the majority stakeholder. He laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "You're joking." "No. You get to keep your title and 40%. I get to make sure the company that wants to find you becomes a place that helps others instead of destroying them." He looked down at the papers, scanning the numbers. His hand trembled. "This is insane," he muttered. "It's business," I replied. "Sign the papers, and you get your rescue. Refuse, and you lose everything." His voice cracked. "Why would you even help me?" "Because I'm not like you, Vincent," I said softly. "And because this isn't help, it's accountability." I pushed a second document toward him. "One more thing. You're going to call our children right now. You're going to tell them the truth, about your affair, your lies, and how you turned them against me." He stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "You can't be serious." "Completely." I took out my phone and placed it on the table. "You make the calls, on speaker, or the deal disappears." He hesitated, jaw tightening. Then he picked up his phone. Nathan answered first, his tone impatient. "Dad, I'm busy." Vincent's voice shook. "Son. I need to tell you something. I lied about your mother. I cheated on her with one of my employees. I hid money from her during the divorce. None of what I told you about her being unstable was true." The silence that followed was long and heavy. Nathan's voice came back strained. "You let me hate her for you. You let me think she was crazy." Vincent's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry." "You should be," Nathan whispered, and the line went dead. He called Claire next. She didn't speak at first, just cried softly. When she finally did, her voice cracked. "You ruined everything, Dad." She was all I had. Vincent couldn't answer. He just stared at the table, ashamed. When the calls ended, I slid the pen across to him. Now sign. He signed. Slowly, silently. I stood up. You'll stay on as managing director. But you'll report to me. The new majority owner. He looked up, stunned. Congratulations, I said. You work for your ex-wife now. I turned to leave, then paused. Oh, one more thing, I said. You know the house you fought so hard to keep? The one you told me I didn't deserve? I bought it this morning. You have 30 days to vacate. It's becoming the headquarters for my foundation. His mouth fell open, but I didn't wait for a response. I walked out into the Portland rain, the same kind that once soaked me behind a dumpster, and this time, it felt like cleansing, not punishment. Over the next months, Second Chapter Women's Alliance began to grow. We offered housing assistance, legal aid, and financial training for women starting over. Every story reminded me of who I'd been and how far I'd come. Ironically, Michael and Associates became one of our biggest contributors. Under my leadership, the firm shifted focus: affordable housing, community centers, women's shelters. Vincent stayed on, quiet, obedient. He never argued again. Every morning, he walked past the plaque I had installed in the lobby. It read, "In honor of Bernard Hayes, who believed women deserve second chances, and that men should be held accountable." People often ask me if I did all this out of revenge. The truth is, revenge burns out. What replaced it was purpose. Power used well stops being vengeance, it becomes justice. When you've been crushed, forgotten, discarded, rising isn't just survival. It's victory. And I was done surviving. It's been 11 months since that day in the coffee shop when I walked away from Vincent and into the rest of my life. Sometimes, I still wake up expecting to see the ceiling of my old car above me. Habits like that don't fade overnight. But now, when I open my eyes, I see sunlight spilling across tall windows. I hear the sound of the city, not as noise, but as proof that I'm alive. My days start early. Mornings belong to the foundation. I walk through our Portland office, the one that used to be Vincent's house, and I see women rebuilding. Some arrive with nothing but hope, others come still trembling from the lives they escaped. We help them start again, with legal support, housing, job training, therapy, and a cup of coffee that doesn't come from pity, but from shared strength. Every time one of them smiles for the first time in months, I see a little of the woman I used to be. Second Chapter Women's Alliance has grown faster than I ever imagined. We've helped 43 women so far, each with a story that could break your heart and then rebuild it stronger. We're funded by Bernard's trust and, ironically, by the profits from Michael and Associates. Yes, Vincent still works there. He comes in on time, keeps to himself, and treats people with respect now. I don't gloat when I see him, I don't need to. His silence says enough. He knows that every paycheck he earns comes from a company owned by the woman he once left with nothing. Sometimes he lingers outside my office, waiting to speak. We exchange polite words, nothing more. I think he wants forgiveness, but I learned that forgiveness isn't something you give to make others comfortable, it's something you give yourself to move on. Nathan visited last month. He stood in my doorway, awkward and nervous, like a boy again. He said, "Mom, I was wrong. I believed things I shouldn't have." I looked at him and saw regret, not arrogance. That was enough. I hugged him, and for the first time in years, it felt real. Claire came later with my granddaughter, Sophia. She ran into my arms shouting, "Grandma." Her laughter filled every empty corner I'd carried inside me. Claire apologized too, slowly, sincerely. We're not the same as before, but we're rebuilding. Healing isn't about pretending it never broke, it's about choosing to fix what's left. When I'm in New York, I live in the penthouse Bernard left me. From the terrace, I can see the city stretch endlessly, a reminder that life keeps going, whether you're ready or not. On weekends, I visit the Hamptons, where his yacht is now part of a non-profit sailing program for children who've never seen the ocean up close. Watching their faces light up when the sails catch wind, it feels like redemption in motion. I've started taking art classes, too. I used to think creativity belonged to youth, but there's something beautiful about starting new at 62. I paint sunsets, cityscapes, and faces I never want to forget, faces of women who thought their stories were over, just like I did. People sometimes call me an inspiration. I smile politely, but inside, I know the truth. I'm not extraordinary. I'm proof that strength doesn't vanish with age, it just waits for the right moment to rise again. A few weeks ago, while having coffee at Powell's, the same place where I once faced Vincent, a woman approached me. She looked about 55, with tired eyes and hands that trembled slightly as she held her bag. She hesitated, then asked, "Are you Ruth Michael? From Second Chapter Foundation?" I nodded. Her voice shook as she said, "I just wanted to thank you. My husband left 6 months ago, and I didn't think I'd survive it. Your foundation helped me find housing and a job. I start next week as a paralegal. You saved my life." She hugged me before I could respond. And for a moment, I was back in that alley, the rain pouring, the stranger calling my name. Except this time, I was the one holding the umbrella. When she left, I sat there in silence, sipping my coffee, realizing something I wish every woman could know. The world will try to measure your worth in money, beauty, and youth. But real worth lives in what you survive, and what you create from the ruins. Vincent once said no one would ever love a broke woman like me. He was right, because the woman I became didn't need anyone to love her to know her value. Now, when I look at my reflection, I don't see failure. I see a story worth telling. I see the scars, the strength, and the peace that only comes from walking through fire and refusing to stay burned. My uncle gave me wealth, but what he truly gave me was freedom. And maybe that's why I keep the final plaque in our Portland office, the one every woman sees when she walks through the door. It reads, "To every woman who thought her story was over, this is just your beginning." So if you're watching this and you've lost everything, your marriage, your friends, your confidence, please listen to me. You are not finished. You are not broken beyond repair. The ending you feared might just be the beginning you needed. Thank you for sharing my story. If it touched your heart, give this video a like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And remember, life can take everything from you except your power to start again. Because when I lost it all, I found myself. And that woman. She was worth the wait.